you, as astute observers of space activities, Tom Rodgers. He's been involved in federal and private research and development activities for many years. In fact, I remember back in 1988, when I first heard him speak, he discussed many of the problems in the space station effort as it was going at that time. And he proved to be 100% accurate in pretty much what was going to happen. He's now going to talk to us about how to take the space station program as it's developed and really make the R&D money that's being invested in pay off.
Most speakers' introductions don't tell you the useful truth about the speaker. You wouldn't know from that that I'm good-looking, bright, great sense of humor, never get angry, think the Federal Civil Space Program is in excellent shape. I am from the city of all wisdom and decision, visiting here in New York. I was on a panel in Baltimore a few months ago at the AAAS, and I found by chance that the 3 out of the other 4 members wrote science fiction. And I got up and I said, I don't. I work on space in Washington, D.C. I live science fiction. So brace yourself. I prefer you to hold your questions till the end because some of you might want to get out. I want you to get the whole story, and then I'll stay as long as you want and try to address your particular interest. I want to do 2 related but quite separate things. I want to look back a little bit at the space station program and then look ahead a little bit. And I'm going to make an assumption that the aspirations of the previous speaker are realized and that the space station as it is now planned in character, cost, schedule, does eventually. I have one caveat about that, though, which I'll mention at the very end when I show you a view graph. First, to look back. Recall we did have a space station once. It's called Skylab. We were going about it in what I consider to be the proper way. You do a little bit, you learn. You do a little bit more, you learn a little bit more. You do it that way. Just walk out and look around New York City and ask yourself, who planned New York City? But anyway, this is the way it goes. In 1982, I was asked by Jack Gibbons, who's now the President's Science Advisor, to direct a study for the Office of Technology Assessment on space stations. And 2 years later, 2 things happened. We issued the report, and President Reagan asked for authorization and appropriations to start the space station program. What the report said, and it took an inch thickness to say it, were the following 3 things. An objective case has been made for having some of our people permanently in low Earth orbit. 2, there are many ways of building a space station, including the one that NASA was then looking at, which plan changed, as you know, several times. 3rd, that $8 billion, which was then the avowed cost, would turn out to be more of a floor than a ceiling. And I think that it's fair to say that those 3 observations have stood the test of time. We have more time ahead of us, and we'll see how things work out. There then commenced a decade-long debate about space. Excuse me. I'm sure that most of you recall parts of that debate. It had to do with the character of the station and its purpose and the memberships and so on. But it took me 10 years approximately to find out what the debate really was about. The debate was whether or not you could build an adequate space station for a modest cost of money. And the debate ended with the conclusion that you could not. You could build no space station, or you could build a very costly space station, but you couldn't build a modestly characterized and modestly costed space station. Why was this? And through this 10-year interval, I began to develop a very, very great apprehension about the core matter of the federal civil space activities. I began to become aware of and convinced of the fact today that is generally recognized, and that is that we've lost our general public constituency. Not our general public interest, but our general public constituency. A constituent is one that will go to the wall for you and take on the expenditure of public monies that other people want to see to go to the cures for cancer research, or air traffic control, or adding to the interstate highway system. We've lost our general public constituency, and the reason is that the government just doesn't do things that enough of the people, the public, want to see done. And these are public funds that we're talking about, and so the decisions are all reached in the political process. And there are many logics, many logics to the political process. Tip O'Neill, great Speaker of the House, once summed it up perfectly. He said, all politics is local. All politics is local. If the federal civil space program were to be doing things, and doing these things in such a way that tens of millions of people in district after district said, that's right, that's good, that's valuable, that's interesting, we'll back it, then we wouldn't have the situation that we do now. So, in looking back, I will never forget an occurrence that took place, never, in 1991. It was 1991, maybe at the beginning of 92. Vice President Quayle went public in some observations about the space station program. It was in one of its characteristic turmoil situations. He said, look, if the program of the space station is in trouble, we need new ideas. We need some. And so I joined a group. We all joined. There were two former NASA administrators who by then had come in from being out in the cold to become human beings again. A former Air Force secretary, the first associate administrator of NASA for the space station. And we thought very, very hard about all this and came to Washington and said, we can build a perfectly reasonable, in fact, a much larger, in fact, a much sooner space station for about 5 cents on the dollar that was then being talked about in Washington. And we talked to the executive branch, we talked to the legislative branch, we talked to OMB, CBO, House, Senate, NASA, White House. Everybody said, gee, that's a great idea. Really wonderful idea. Cheap. And then the vote was taken, and the government space station program carried. Smartly. Well, I took 2 martinis, one of them regularly, back up to the Hill to talk to a group of senators and representatives meeting on another subject entirely that I was interested in. And I said, what the hell happened? You all said this was a great idea, and yet you voted for the space station. And what's your problem? They asked. You didn't ask us how we were going to vote. Well, I said, suppose I'd asked you how you're going to vote. What would you have said? They said, we're going to vote for the space station. Well, I said, how in the name of Christ Christendom can you say, great idea, save all this money, but we're going to vote? And they said, for heaven's sakes, Tom, the space station program is a jobs program. And you want to shorten its scope? You want to reduce the public expenditures? In the State Department, this is called counterproductive. Well, I had 2 more martinis, and that was that. Now, we live in a democracy. These are public funds. They're passed out in the political process. There are many logics. And so we're going to have a space station. And it's the space station that has devolved from this political process. During the Second World War, Winston Churchill once said about the Nazis that Hitler makes no mistakes except catastrophic ones. In a democracy, we don't very often make catastrophic mistakes, but we're not perfect either. And so, we have what we have that you've heard in technical terms before I started to speak, and I'm sure a lot of you know about the matter of the international cooperation. I'm not going to talk about those things. What I'm simply going to say is that if we are successful in what we do, we will have in low Earth orbit 2 to 3 people working half-time, because the rest of the time the space station is going up Big Bang, doing productive scientific research work at a cost of a few $1 billion a person year. That's what we're going to have. Those 2 or 3 people are going to be working very, very hard and very, very fast to justify those numbers. Now let's look ahead. By the way, I love everybody, but I used to be a scientist, and I have to look at the data. You know, I have to look at the data. And so I've given you the data. And yet, it is also fair to say that at the moment, the space station program is in politically strong position. I'll come back to that just before I finish. Now let's look ahead. We're going to have a space station. We know what it's going to look like. We know how long it's going to take. We know when it's being thought about doing. Let me suggest that we should look at the space station and the space station program in another few additional ways. What are the potential values of the space station and the space station program? There are 3. One that I would agree, all of us would agree to. We're going to learn how to survive there. We're going to learn how to wax. We're going to learn how to do things in an increasingly more effective and efficient fashion, and that's all to the good. That's one. 2, the space station and the space station program are going to provide a large government market for surface LEO space transportation. A market that is absolutely vital to our acquisition of a post-X-33 commercial vehicle fleet. It's going to have to be paid for with private funds, quite possibly the order of $10 billion. There will not, repeat not, be $10 billion in public funds made available to build what follows on from the shuttle. The money will have to come from Wall Street. It'll have to be looked at as a sound investment to begin with in order to deal with the terrible amortization circumstance of trying to swallow $10 billion of acquisition. I'm not talking about the O&M. I'm talking about the development cost. We have got to have a large, continuing government market for space transportation services. And the space station program will offer that. The third value of the space station program is A&P. We should look at the space station as a physical focal point around which private sector activities and assets will begin to congregate. Now, we may be fortunate, I hope so. It may be that these 2 people working very hard and very fast will discover something worth the scores of billions of dollars. But my own judgment is that what will happen is that you will have private sector interests up there. And with the coming of the post-X-33 vehicle fleet, we will be able to see costs come down quite a bit. We will begin to see volumes put up there that match the interests of the people who would spend the money for them. And there will be a physical focal point, very, very important, that you can find somebody to talk to, that you can borrow an aspirin from, or have a drink, something like that. A physical focal point. Secondly, and that's the station. Secondly, the value is to be found in the space station program, acting as an institutional focal point, as a bank. We will see the government spending between the shuttle and the space station for years, some $5 billion a year. That money should be used to two ends. One, learn how to privatize as rapidly as possible all of the activities on the space station. Get those costs down. Get them down. Let me give you three numbers. I directed a study for the IEEE a few years back, and we said in the IEEE study, in earthly terms, here's what we face in space today. The cost of electricity is 1,000 times what it is on the Earth's surface in LEO. The cost of getting back and forth to space relative to getting back and forth between New York and London is 10,000 times as high. The cost of residential and working volume in low Earth orbit compared to the commercial space that you can see here in the office, in terms of space station numbers, 100,000 times as great. Now, if those numbers persist, you can bet your sweet bottom dollar on two things. One, you will not see commercial activity in the human spaceflight area. Nobody can afford to pay these costs and get a return on their investment. And two, unless we see these costs come down and commercial activities wax, the difficulties in the civil space program will simply accelerate. That's the difficulty it's in now, and it will get worse unless something happens of the nature of that. So, what we should see then is an absolute commitment to no more public investments beyond the baseline space station for assets. All of the assets and all of the activities, all of the services should be purchased from the private sector at competitive arrangements to get the lowest possible unit cost. And every time you rebid, the cost will come down. Will come down. We ought to be thinking big about space, not costly about space. I don't know how many are familiar with the Teledesic program. I know Ed talked well. And they are talking about building 1,000 satellites. 1,000, not one, not 10, not 100, 1,000. In mass production, the costs plummet. The 1,001th satellite of the Teledesic system, they now judge, will cost $3 million. $3 million. By the way, the amount of power that they're going to put up there, 10 million beginning of life watts. 10 megawatts. 1,000 satellites at 10,000 watts to begin with. 10 megawatts. Now that's the way to think about space. And the cost way down, and the launch cost will be way down, because now people can design their factories and their O&M circumstances to deal with big numbers, as we do elsewhere in our economy. Now already, and I should say the following, the acting in this fashion, the first thing is to get privatization. Have somebody else supply the oatmeal. Have somebody else supply the power. Somebody else supply logistics. And we'll privatize, and the government will save money. And as we get these costs down from privatization, we will make it possible and even encourage people in the private sector to do commercial things. So those are the values, as I see them, of the space station and the space station program. Already, there are a number of interests focusing on this second and third set of values. I'm personally working with a group that knows how to reduce and how to privatize and reduce some of the space station services by between 1 and 2 orders of magnitude, between 10 and 100 times. By the way, I don't want to be understood as saying that the people in the government and in the space industry are dull, uneducated, venal, lazy. I'm not saying any of those things. What I'm saying is nobody gave a damn about cost, except to maximize them so that they would help employ them. That's a different logic. Never gets talked about in the space meetings such as this. It's the only thing that's talked about in the inner councils of government. I was a deputy director of defense research and engineering for some upwards of 4 years during the Cold War, part of the peak of the Cold War, beginnings of the Vietnam War. Terrible days. When the bodies are piling up on the beaches like cordwood, you don't call in an accountant. You want technology to be developed. You want the maximum capability. Your civilization is at stake. Your life is at stake. That's why we had the Apollo program. Nothing to do with going to the planets. Nothing. It was to upstage the Soviet Union. Do it smartly, do it in public, rub it into them, which we did with a land. But nobody cared about costs. Now the world has changed, and we must care about costs. But when you have the sons of engineers who are now engineers, and so in the family you've had 40 years of experience of developing technology and engineering it with no attention being paid to cost, let me tell you, turning it around is like pulling a plumber's helper off the wall. What? It hurts. It's loud. It's nasty. It's messy. And that's what we're in the midst of seeing now. So, there is a major aerospace company that is now close to agreement with NASA to undertake a corporate study, a joint corporate study of a station-related space business park. The Space Frontier Foundation is developing further, with increasing LM, its Alpha Town concept. That's the way to think of what should go on. Let's build a town. Let's build a town. With the space station itself being the government, quasi-military, high-cost, high-risk outpost. You know, at the intersection of the Missouri and the Mississippi Rivers or some other wonderful place, that's what you've got. That's the way it happens always. The government almost always, or the government back, they take the upfront risk, they get out, they establish the presence, shoot the Indians if there are any Indians, and then the people follow. The rest of the people follow. So that's what we ought to be thinking about up there, is the building of a town with all that that means. And we ought to build a town, it should go without saying, I'll say it, the way we build towns almost all the time without the friendly federal government having anything to do with it. After I spent 4 of the happiest years of my life working for the Office of the Secretary of Defense, on my way back to MIT, I was deflected. Story all itself. And I became the first director of research in the then brand new federal Department of Housing and Urban Development. In the years I was there, I learned more about this country and how it's governed than I ever did before or since. And let me tell you, it's not the way you think. It really isn't. One thing that happened while I was there is that HUD, in order to get enough votes to advance the prospects of public housing for the poorer people in the country, decided to start a new cities program as well, in which we build whole new cities. Well, the universities came over the hill like gangbusters. All kinds of them, everybody. Federal money. The last time I looked, which was a few years ago, I think there were 15 started. 14 had failed. The 15th hadn't failed because they found oil on the land that would be devoted to building a new city. Look, there are some things which only governments can do. They defend us, they police us, do things like that. But most things governments aren't very good at doing. We know we can do wonderful things in space. We see them in the information areas. The satellite communications business is booming, booming. It's up to about $10 billion a year now, growing 10 or 15% a year. GPS Navstar receiver computers are now grossing about $2 billion a year. And the judgment is that within 10 years it'll be up to $10 billion a year, maybe even 20. Going like gangbusters, maybe even remote sensing. Maybe I'll live long enough to see the hand of the military, whom I love, be pulled off remote sensing, and that business will begin to prosper. And what does that mean? It means jobs, but now private sector jobs. It means increased employment. It means increased tax base, some of the taxes of which can then be used sensibly and with credibility to explore the planets, to move out across the solar system as a cultural activity, which it is, not an economic activity, it may eventually. We're going back to what the government does, go out front, take the risk, but now we can afford it. We'll be able to deal with international competition a lot better. Let me then begin to wind down by saying the following. We all have our own views. I worked for a man who was an assistant secretary of defense at one time, said, you know, Tom, I may not always be correct, but I'm never wrong. So I'm going to give you my three desires for what could go on in space in LEO. One, tourism. I want to go to space, and it frosts my ass, but I can't go to space. We'll hear more about this, those of you who are interested, tomorrow afternoon. I'm spending a good fraction of my life now on that issue as president of the Space Transportation Association. And by the way, for God's sakes, the first thing I should have said was I'm not speaking for the Space Transportation Association. While I'm fairly confident they would all agree, there might be some oddball that might take exception to one or two of the things I've said. So, there is a formal agreement now in existence between NASA and the Space Transportation Association to look at what's required to get a space tourism business started in the United States. We'll talk about that tomorrow. So that's what I'd like to see. Second thing I'd like to see, sports. I want to see sports in space. I want to start all over. Throw all the records out the window. All of them. In the absence of gravity, we start afresh. Everything. Love it. Chuck has heard me say this before, but my favorite sport is my starting sport would be the following. You have a couple of astronaut types up there. They've finished their tour, whatever they're doing. They put on the appropriate union suits. They open up the door with some additional equipment. They jump. They jump out of low Earth orbit. The first one to reach the Earth alive goes into the Guinness Book of Records. How do you like that? Everybody in the world will know that man's name or that woman's name. They'll know about his family. They'll know everything. It'd be the biggest thing, the simplest thing, the most exhilarating thing that could happen. Then it's who can get down to the X drawn in the middle of Main Street in downtown Waverly, Kansas. Come the closest. And the third, not only the closest, but the fastest. My God, we could do all this for practically nothing. And someone's going to get sick rich doing it. Maybe it's CBS, maybe it's... The third, quite different. I would like to see an ensemble of laboratories of different sizes and character in LEO, probably gathered around the focal point of the space station, devoted to life sciences research, and particularly one kind, those dealing with the diseases and disabilities of the aging. Why? Substantive and institutional. In the Skylab, when the first astronauts came back in the 73, 74 time period, I was on an Institute of Medicine committee over at the National Academy. And I was surrounded by surgeons, doctors, hospital superintendents. And the men came back and they were suffering from cardiovascular difficulties. They lost lung capacity. Calcium was migrating from their bones. They recovered sharply. This happened 3 times. And the longer they were up there, the more. I said one day to these doctors, "My God, you know what the hell's happening to these types? They're getting old. Very rapidly, they're aging." And that's what happens to them. They recover. Can you imagine doing scientific work when you're studying the disabilities and things of the aging and do it in a very, very small fraction of the time? Get all the way down to the molecular level, cell level, and do things you can't do here and there. Now, that's the substantive reason. The institutional reason is, with a little luck, you'll live to be my age and longer. A tremendous demographic change going on in the entire world for the last 100 or 200 years. The populations are aging. The most rapidly growing part of our population are the oldest people, the ones that are 85 years and older. And they are the ones, of course, that need more health care, medical care, social assistance. And so we have this tremendous growing and inevitably almost paralytic circumstance in the federal government in Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. If there's any kind of research to go on in space, any kind, that's it. And let's study the aging. Do you know, by the way, do any of you know why people die? That's all right. Nobody else does. There are 2 views. One view says, well, you know, life is, speed travels at 186,000, light travels at 156,000 miles a second. Gravitational force is inversely proportional to the square of the distance. Whatever they are, you know, people die. It's just one of those things. Another group that says, oh, don't give me that. It's a disease. Let's find out what causes it and cure it. Talk about your far frontiers. Forget about Mars. Come on, dead rock. Why do people age? How do people age? How can you change this? How can you make us all live a very, very healthy life until a microsecond after the shutters come down? Before they come. There's a far frontier. So those are my 3, those are mine. You have your own views. But that's what I would like to see going on up in space. 2 final things. First, let me show you a graph. Those are the budget projections for NASA. The black squares are the ones that flesh out what President Clinton said just a couple of months ago. Those are his outdated projections. If these projections are realized, by the year 2000, including these reductions in dollars and a 2.5% to 3% average annual inflation rate, the NASA budget in purchasing power will be down 30% from today. But there's more to it than that. If in the bottom part of the curve, which would go down to 0, you say we have an untouchable in the shuttle, which is required to build a space station, which is untouchable. That's $5 billion. If you take $5 billion out of a 30% reduced budget, what you have for everything else besides the space station and the shuttle is down 60%. Those are going out of business careers, ladies and gentlemen. Not very much fun to look at, not very much fun to contemplate. And it all goes back to the simple fact that what the government has chosen to do in space just doesn't interest enough people. That finally is the way that public funds get allocated and spent in the United States of America. One last thing, and by the way, I should have added, if you think that the shuttle program and the space station program are going to stick to their present schedule under these circumstances, you may be correct. Then again, you may not. One final thing. There's something that hardly ever gets talked about that was brought back to my mind on Wednesday, and that is the great physical risk in these activities. As you know, the Challenger disaster shocked us badly, stopped everything dead. A lot of them. For almost 5 years, we have a tough schedule here in building this space station. A very risky one. And while, like the rest of you, I just trust that nothing will go awry, we could have a serious accident. Dan Golan spoke about his absolute determination last Wednesday at the Washington Space Business Roundtable to see the shuttle fleet continue to operate safely. But life is life. If you ever have the opportunity to drive across the Chesapeake Bay Bridge and Tunnel, which connects Norfolk to the eastern shore of Maryland, you stop in the middle of the Bay Bridge and Tunnel, you get a drink, soft drink, hot dog. There's a plaque with the names on it of all the men who died in the construction of that extraordinary item, the bridge and tunnel. When I joined HUD, I thought I was leaving all this behind in defense. Well, I wasn't. I started talking to people who build large public structures, all kinds of things. And every time they go into a large building, a dam, an airport, whatever it is, amongst the other things they put down, the best judgments from experience, they get it pretty correct. Other number of people will die, the number of people who will be seriously injured. Now, what happened in 1986 must never happen again. We lost our nerve. Everybody knows that if you fall off a horse and you intend to continue riding horses, you get right back on that horse's back like that. If you are a pilot of a military aircraft and it goes 8 and you are ejected, you parachute to the ground, right back on it. I trust that all of you are thinking about this now and then and are insisting wherever you go that part of the space station program plan is, if the worst happens, we'll go and we'll pray, and then we'll get right back up. We'll get thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'll try to answer.
Questions?
Yes.
What do you think of this Pepsi and Coke thing?
Let me tell you what I think. I think it's a goddamn shame the way it was handled. I want Pepsi up there. I want Coke up there. I want every company in the country up there as quickly as possible. Creating employment, creating economic growth, creating jobs, creating tax base, creating international, fast, fast. You saw the curves. You saw the curves. Why? I'll be more general, but you just have a great opening question. You really touched the. I don't get it. I don't get it. Any more questions? Yes.
What did HUD do for research and development seen their buildings, and obviously they haven't researched better HUD,
Yeah.
Housing and Urban Development.
Yeah.
Talk about government development, talking about houses and buildings in space that cost thousands of times of what we build now. HUD buildings cost 10 times what they should, are 3 times as ugly, and fail 5 times as fast.
I don't know about the actual numbers of the, I once made a study of, by the way, I worked for a great man, came from New York, Bob Weaver, Robert C. Weaver, first black cabinet officer, couldn't be any more different people. You know, I came from MIT, space, OSD, he came from New York, public servant, public housing, and one of the first things he said to me, I was in full flight, and he said, Tom, let me explain something to you. What is that, Mr. Secretary? He said, you know how the system works, you got to get 50+% of the votes. It's China. He says, well, I'm the urban secretary, so I always start out with only about 30% of the votes. I said, oh. He said, I got to get 20%. I said, well, I understand that. He said, well, I'm trying to get the 20, Tom. Don't lose me any of the 30. Please, don't lose me any of the 30. And I learned an awful lot. I had a study performed about the cost of public housing in New York City. And out of it, I learned 2 things. I learned that if a piece of housing cost $8, and you took out the cost of the wood and the hammer and the nails and all those things, what was left in the cost of the housing far exceeded the costs of the materials and the labor. And all of it went into frictional losses. You've got to call this person, you've got to wait for that person, you've got to file this piece of paper, you know, life goes on. And when I showed it to the Secretary of Jesus, I said, please, don't tell me that. I said, why? He said, I don't want to know about it. I want you to go out there and do what you have to do. But as soon as somebody says, Robert C. Weaver says, this is why housing costs what it does in New York City, I'll have all New York City to deal with. All politics. You know, many logics. Any other questions? Yes, way in the back.
If the United States is to change to private-based space industry, how long do you expect Space Station Alpha to last, where it has to deal with people like the Russians or the Japanese or the Europeans who will still probably maintain a government-based system?
I am not saying for a second that we should not have a strong, vibrant, federal, publicly supported civil space program. I'm not saying that. But I am saying that as a one-time scientist, I have to look at the data. What we are doing now is resulting in those data. The President of the United States, in a presidential election year, where he is trying not to hurt anybody's feelings, anywhere, about anything, said, cut the NASA budget. Didn't say cut the NIH budget. We should undertake it for 2 reasons. 1, advancing risky technology. Doing it until the private sector, which by definition must have shorter terms, can pick it up and use it. That's what we did in satellite communications. It worked fine. We should also do things for cultural reasons. We support symphony orchestras. We support public parks. We should support going to Mars as a cultural activity. Stop all this nonsense, and we're going to find gold up there or something. But then we got to find the money for it. And we got to find the political animus for it. And that comes out of doing what a large number of people want to have done for them. All politics is local. NASA should be doing these things until it builds up to the point where we were back in the Apollo days, where the NASA people and the space industry people strode the world like giants. They were semi-gods. And then you say to the American people, we've been doing what you've wanted for the last 10. How about letting us go to Mars? By now the cost is down by a factor of 100. Let's go. They say, sure, why not? That's the way to compete. Europe is in the same situation. They're having all kinds of problems deciding how and how much and how rapidly to spend money on civil space, publicly funded money. I don't know what's going on in Russia. I know what the Japanese are doing. They're outthinking us. The Japanese Rocket Society said in the front piece of an English translation of a special issue of that society's journal, which the Space Transportation Association got permission to republish, which we did in our association journals, said that we in Japan have been following what the Soviet Union and now Russia and the United States have been doing in the human spaceflight area for a long time. We were satisfied to follow along. But now we have come to the conclusion that in Japan, we're going to do something different. What we're going to do with the human spaceflight area is focus on the creation of a large space tourism business. Does that answer your question, brother? Thank you. Yes.
Do you say then that there's no hope to change these numbers, that there's no use to even try to change public perception and turn things around? Is this inevitable? Do you really have to live with this? I don't think so.
No. Of course not. I put them up there to get the mule's attention. You know, one of the nice things about the space business is you meet a lot of very, very nice people. And they all live in the same hothouse, and they all talk to each other. If I put up a graph there showing a field strength or an ohm or a gear or a cat load, you're all lined up. That's the kind of people we are. That's not the problem. We know how to deal with those things. Given the resources, given the will. But in order to come to grips with the problem, you first have to understand its character, its magnitude, and the time constants. We are in trouble right now. Clinton could just as well have said, put the curves the other way. I don't think so. If you ask me today, do I think the NASA budget should go up, considering what they're doing? The answer is no, absolutely not. I'm one of the people that say, look, I know what could go on in space and should go on in space that isn't going on. Throw the rascals out. That's America. Now that's one vote. That's one vote. Look, let me tell you what, we're sure in communications. I want to tell you the story of the life of the English diplomat. He would be sent every 5 years to a different country. And he'd have to learn the history, he'd have to learn the language, he'd have to learn about the institutions and so on. Well, she used to read up on it a little bit, but she never learned any foreign language. She was absolutely convinced that if she spoke clearly enough and loudly enough, the natives would be sure to understand. Now don't tell me that you and I are dopes, that we can't come to our conclusions about what's going on and should go on in space. We know. So let's stop kidding ourselves. I repeat, there are a lot of very, very interesting, exciting, useful things that aren't being done. And that's what's got there. You know, let me speak up. I know Dan Golan reasonably well. We tangle a good part of the time, you know. That's because he's nice and I'm not. It is. He gave a talk, as I said, at the Western Space Business Roundtable. And if you listen to Dan and you observe what he's doing, what he says is gripping, and what he's doing is the right thing. He's shaking the place up. He's trying to move a lot of decision-making power about how to do things out of Washington. That's in general a step in the correct direction. He's trying to get the costs down. He's trying to get the times down. He's doing all the things that he's doing are right. By the way, he's not thought as America's sweetheart. I'll tell you that. But there's one thing that he's not doing. He's not changing his product mix. He's not changing what it is. He will, if you listen to Dan outside the room, I was not in Baltimore. At the time, in the beginning of the year, when we were just beginning to find evidence of planetary bodies around the distant sun. I mean, the guy is smart, he's articulate. Jeez, I could almost weep listening to him. But then the rest of the world comes in and you say, well, that gets you on the cover of Time magazine for a full week. And sorry about that. All politics is local. All politics is local. And we're always, I'll tell you another story. Let's see if I can help by telling you. I like to tell stories that are appropriate. There was a National Commission on Space issued a report at the end of 1990, it was run by Norm Augustine. When I was on the third floor over the Pleasant Palace, he was on the fourth, not that far, well. And I went to the last meeting of the committee, and when I heard, I said, Jesus Christ, am I going out of my mind? Am I losing the grip? Am I hearing correctly? These people are saying we can look forward to 10% per year real growth throughout every year of the decade of the 90s. And they said the central focal point of the federal program should be scientific research. Well, I talked to Dan Fink, I talked to Ben Schriever, I talked to Norm, I said, please, so they held one more meeting, and they let me talk. I might just as well have gone down and urinated in the water. All the people on the committee bored to death, their eyeballs rolled up into their head. And I was pretty disappointed. But then something happened. There was a conversation, a discussion immediately after I sat down. People put down the newspapers then. And one of them said, you know, one of the troubles with NASA is that when it goes in to get its money, it's got to go into appropriation subcommittees in which you're dealing with HUD, the VA, other independent agencies. Until we can only get them out of that. And everybody says, yes, that's right. If we can only, except one person, Eddie Bolton. Eddie from Massachusetts was the chairman of the House Appropriations Committee for years and years. Very highly thought of man. He said, no. If NASA can't convince the American people that what it's doing is as important as taking care of our disabled veterans and housing our poor, that it shouldn't get the money. And that's the way it's working out. So we've got to change. We've got to change. And change, you know what change is? Great English motion picture years ago, one of the great British actors, what the hell was his name? Peter, he played the part of the head union labor leader. And he was talking in the negotiations with the head of the great industrial company. And finally came down to this, he said, "Oh, right, Nag, you're for change. I'm for change. We're all for change. You change." Well, thank you all very, very much.
Hey, one more question.
One more?
One more question.
Yes. Please.
What type of regulatory and legislative changes do you think should be made to be able to move forward into privatizing space? Not more funding, but getting barriers out of the way.
My own sense is that the clearest thing and the simplest thing that could be done now would be to see the NASA authorization bill say the space station is going to be privatized, and that the space station program will be used to see that happen and commercialization to grow. Now, I know that that's a very, very big order, because all the people at NASA and in the space industry that are working on space stations, have been working on it for decades, they're going to be working on it for another decade. They got technological problems, they got engineering problems, they got political problems, they got schedule problems, they got financing problems. Now you come in and you say, oh, by the way, one more thing. And don't worry about the fact that you've got Canadians and all European countries, Russia, Japan. Privatize it. Their eyeballs roll back up in there. But that is the single thing that I believe to do it. And there was language like that, but NASA didn't get an authorization bill this year because of, you know, life messing, sometimes it's even messing. That's what I believe. Thank you.